The public-private partnership projects that are very suitable for climate sustainability are in general related to a bunch of sectors, particularly renewable energy, water and sanitation. But they can also be in the transportation area as well, by gaining efficiencies and long-term maintenance of these projects. As we can see in the region, which is one of the most active public-private partnership regions in the developing world, is that involving the private sector in a meaningful manner and with a good allocation of risks can generate efficiency gains, not only from the fiscal point of view, but also from the sustainability aspects. The Latin American and the Caribbean region has a track record of not maintaining adequately their infrastructure. Studies that we have run together with the Pacific University in Peru show that not maintaining roads in a proactive manner can generate that the cost for rehabilitating those roads down the road will be 7 times higher than a periodic maintenance. This has a severe impact not only on the fiscal side, because you are paying 7 times more, which you could have saved by having a proactive maintenance, but also an impact on lives, because sinistrality or accidents are much higher in non-concession roads than in concession roads. This has another aspect of sustainability, which is the private participation is usually instrumented through a long-term contract. And this long-term contract works as a sort of a guarantee, if well enforced by the public authorities, that the private sector will incur in those proactive maintenance, avoiding major costs, lowering sinistrality or accidents, and generating a more efficient infrastructure. Some projects are better suited than others because of their nature and their sectors. We can see how Latin America and the Caribbean have expanded its renewable base in solar, in wind, mainly by the private sector participation, and that this is, except for some exceptions and some recent developments in some countries with the nationalization of the electricity generation sectors, most countries, even though those countries that have public monopolies, are hiring through PPAs the renewable energy generation. This is a clear case where the private sector has been able to mobilize enough resources to invest. There are key features there, technology that is advancing very fast. They need capital-intensive investment, which sometimes cannot be kept up by the public utilities, and innovation. There is a big factor of innovation where engaging the private sector can generate a lot of efficiency gains. This is also something that we start to see in the water and sanitation sector through some new developments in technologies, like non-revenue water contracts in the Caribbean, or the new interest on desalination plants in several countries in the region. As you know, allocating risk is key for a successful public-private partnership. Usually, a generic definition of that is that we need to allocate that risk to the party that is best suited to mitigate it. And this makes the allocation of risk a key factor to long-term sustainability of the contract. And when I refer to sustainability at the IDB, we refer to 3 different levels. Of course, climate, of course, social, but very important, fiscal. These 3 categories of sustainability are key for a long-term contract success. More and more as we advance in the private engagement in infrastructure, we will see more hybrid PPPs, in the sense that they will be funded through not only user payments, but also some availability payments or subsidies coming from the government, where the fiscal sustainability of those contracts is key. As per the risk, you have a clear determined risks that are borne by the private sector, like technology risk, construction risk, termination risk. You have some classes risks that you need usually to put on the public sector, like the access to the land, licensing, if there is a forex exchange, some mitigation risk for forex exchange. And after the pandemic, I would say that especially for transportation projects, we are seeing a new trend of demand risk being borne by the public sector. Sorry. Involving the adequate stakeholders during the preparation process of public-private partnerships is key for the success of the contract. We have seen many good projects that have not been able to come to fruition because of lack of due participation of different communities, different stakeholders. And when I refer to stakeholders, I'm referring both to public and private stakeholders. And good projects need to be shared with the civil society adequately to be sure that the civil society understands the cost and the benefits of the projects. In a highly urbanized region like Latin America and the Caribbean, the more we enter into more private participation infrastructure, we see the social tension in the implementation of large infrastructure projects. So due participation of the civil society is key early on and in a meaningful way. But also the private sector, both financiers, developers, and sponsors are key to enter in the process with all the guarantees and the due diligence on conflict of interest. This is key to have a bankable project down the road that it could be absorbed by the private sector. Within the public agents, usually you have a tension between the ministers of finance and the sector ministers that also need to be engaged in a meaningful manner. And if we are talking about subnational projects, the adequate participation of the subnational governments is key as well. The potential challenges to the bankability of the public-private partnerships have to do start with a good prioritization of the projects, which is an area where the Latin American and the Caribbean can improve a lot. That's a priority from the IDB group, and particularly for the PPP single window. An adequate prioritization of the projects mean that we are sure we are working in a project that yields value for money for the engagement of the private sector. Then after that, you are sure that you are instrumented a good PPP. Another challenge is the creation of the capacity to structure bankable deals. This is not a capacity that we can see across the countries in Latin America. We have a group of more advanced countries on PPPs like Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Peru. Newcomers with successful programs like Uruguay, Panama, and other entering into the program in these last years. Creating that capacity demands resources and skilled human resources, and the adequate framework of resources to sustain the project preparation phase, which usually takes between 36 months and 48 months, is key. There is a lot of misalignment between the political cycle and the maturity of these projects. This is a big challenge, and this has been emphasized by the pandemic, where we have seen project preparation phase lasting longer than before. Our support to Jamaica and the sustainability for their public-private partnership program has been extremely encouraging and successful. We have engaged in the last 3 years with the government and the Development Bank of Jamaica in developing a toolkit for mainstreaming sustainability during the PPP or public-private partnership project preparation phase. In this effort, we generated a guideline and a toolkit to mainstream all the sustainability aspects. So both the public sector and the Development Bank of Jamaica are able to assess for the long-term sustainability of the projects. This has also been very well received by the International Monetary Fund. In last month, Jamaica has been able to access to a resilient program under the new resilient facility of the IMF. And one of the key conditions to fulfill is being related to this toolkit that we have developed together with the Climate Change and Sustainability Department of the IDB. Mainstreaming climate change and sustainability to the infrastructure in general and to public-private partnerships in particular, it's key for our work at the PPP single window of the IDB group. We have been championing the mainstreaming of the sustainability aspect and the sustainability certification for the projects we engage with the countries. We are part of the FAST label infrastructure sustainable label pilot phase. In this capacity, 2 projects that we structured last year in Brazil, 2 public lighting projects in the municipality of Nova Lima and Cachoeiro de Itapemirim have reached commercial close, and they are part of the sustainable label. We are currently in the bidding process of a hospital in the southern state of Santa Catarina in Brazil that will also be part of this pilot phase. Being part of this pilot phase, it's for us an acknowledgement of the quality of our work. Few projects have been admitted to this phase. This will also generate the possibility to engage with sustainable investors and other kind of angel investors that are focusing on this kind of certifications. A big part of our upstream support to public agencies in the region, as I mentioned before, Colombia, Jamaica, of course, Peru, Chile, and Brazil. We are working in the either second phases of sustainability guidelines and toolkits, or the mainstreaming of sustainability aspects during the project preparation process. This is an upstream work at the policy level, helping them to internalize the climate sustainability effects and to make those projects down the road sustainable investment to attract also sustainable investors. Engaging, including climate change and sustainability in public and private investment programs is key for the governments in the new phase that our region is entering. Latin America and the Caribbean has left the pandemic in a very critical fiscal situation. The report on macroeconomics of the region from our research department in 2023 show that the ratio of debt to GDP have moved from roughly 53-55% to more than 70%. And estimations from our research department show that our region will have to come back to an area of between 45 and 55% of this ratio of debt to GDP. I say this because this puts the region into a critical crossroad. The region faces a very big infrastructure gap in order to meet the Sustainable Development Goals, but at the same time faces a critical fiscal situation. The fiscal space to invest in infrastructure is smaller and smaller. And the need to mobilize private capital becomes more and more important. In order to do that, if the governments do not sophisticate and modernize their planning methodologies and their capacities in order to mainstream climate change and sustainability will be less able to mobilize sustainable investors, to access to grant funds, to blended finance, focus on these climate challenges. And so I don't think now is not doing it is not an option anymore. And that's why it's a key priority of in the IDB group. Particularly our new president, Ilan Golfan, mentioned that sustainable infrastructure is one of the key priorities of the group moving forward. So for us, this is not an option anymore. It's a must for the governments in order to meet that infrastructure gap. The advice we can provide to governments trying to include climate considerations in their public and private investment plans. First of all, is to go back to a stronger planning capacity. The climate change and sustainability challenges have changed dramatically the need of the governments to have a very good planning capacity in order to prioritize the projects that are more needed. Second, they will need to have clear priority for mainstreaming resiliency and mitigation and adaptations measures at a planning level in order to then evaluate the projects accordingly. That will allow them to select the projects that have the most climate impact and that help them to comply with the different challenges and the NDCs. Yeah, there are a few countries that I mentioned before where we are working very strongly with the different agencies involved, both the infrastructure policy agencies, being the Minister of Infrastructure, sometimes the Minister of Finance, sometimes the PPPs, the Public-Private Partnerships agencies. As I mentioned before, we have a very strong relationship and work with Jamaica, both with the Development Bank of Jamaica and the Minister of Finance that gave the opportunity to participate of the IMF Residency Facility. We are working also with ANI, the Agency for National Infrastructure in Colombia, also in updating their sustainability guidelines for the infrastructure projects. And we are doing the same with the Dirección General de Concesiones in Chile and with the Minister of Finance in Peru as we speak. We are also working with public development banks in the region. We have been partnering with the BNDES in Brazil and generated a platform called Banks Hub, Banks Projects Hub, which mainly have a template for sustainability aspects of projects to mobilize private capital. And this has been also working in partnership with Banobras in Mexico. So these are kind of examples in where with different stakeholders involved in the private participation in infrastructure can be brought to help identify the good practices that eventually will lead to sustainable infrastructure projects. The triple sustainability, being climate, social, and fiscal, are key to the success of public-private partnership. Public-private partnerships are long-term contracts, referring to 15 to 25 years contracts. These contracts are very complex. They involve the private sector and they generate social tensions in some countries. Therefore, the adequate involvement of the private sector and the impact communities and the beneficiaries of those projects is key for the sustainability of those projects in the long run. Also, we have a study developed in 2018-2019 that shows that both land acquisition and licensing and social participation are the two main key factors in Latin America for cost overruns and time delays in infrastructure projects. and a pure strategy to deal with these situations in the region generates higher cost and longer periods for construction. So this is not only on the sustainability of the long-term contract, but also in the efficiency of the procure and implementation of the projects. Moving to the third aspect, the fiscal sustainability aspects. We know now, after more than 2 decades of public-private partnerships in the world, in Latin America, in this new phase, this is now that only 2 decades of PPPs. There have been concessions for many centuries, but we are now in a new era where we know that the public-private partnerships involve not only express commitments from government money, but also contingent liabilities. These contingent liabilities can somehow kick all together if they are not well planned, and that could put on risk the fiscal position of the government. We have some examples that happened in the past, not only in Latin America, but also around the world. So being sure that both the express fiscal commitment, but also the contingent liabilities are well identified and well managed and foreseen is key for not having a problem 8, 10, 15 years down the road in those contracts.